My name is Carter. I'm an undergrad in the philosophy department here. I will also be talking about terrorism. I'll be coming at it from a slightly different perspective than Francesco, though. So, the first slide. My thesis is the word terrorism is too broad and morally loaded to be used in ontology. So if you just Google terrorism ontology, a bunch of hits come up. There's been attempts to do it. I'll look at differences between freedom fighter and terrorist because I do think this is an issue where in one sense it seems like if the United States is in favor of a group, then they're freedom fighters, and if they're not in favor of that same group, then they're terrorists. So if you remember, Colonel Mandrick 2 weeks ago said there's instances where he worked with one group where one group was considered terrorists one day, and then the next day basically considered them freedom fighters. Seems like it's basically whatever side the United States is on. I'll look at the etymology of the word terrorism. I will look at a few definitions. I'll actually look at a separate Meggle definition that he gives in his paper. I'll look at possible revisions to the definition, and I'll give some proposed alternative language to using terrorism. So I'll just give a quick, what conflict is this? Sovereign country X invades sovereign country Y. Country X quickly overwhelms the military of country Y. Civilians from a small town in country Y take up arms and hide in a dense forest outside of the small town. Civilians of country Y begin to use terrorist acts in an attempt to push country X out. Seems like it's pretty common in the last 20, 30, forever years. It's actually the plot to a movie, Red Dawn. In this movie, the group seen here called the Wolverines, and North Korea invades the United States, quickly overwhelms their military, puts their town elders in a re-education camp. He is home on leave from the military. He trains everybody else how to use weapons. They do things like run into the town, quickly shoot at the North Korean army. They run away. They have little improvised bombs. So I watched this movie, and it didn't sit well with me because it seemed like it was American propaganda. Like, it was seemed like if you just changed the terms and made them Iraqi and the North Koreans American, it seemed a lot like the American-Iraqi conflict. And it bothered me that it seems like this were to actually happen, and we were invaded, we would, idolize these people. They'd be people that we look up to, people who are fighting for American freedom, right? From a country that invaded us. But the Iraqis who do that virtual same thing of trying to defend Iraqi freedom from something they don't understand, maybe North Korea would make the United States better. We don't know that. The United States presumes that they're going to make... The United States presumes that they're going to make Iraq better, but it seems like the last 12 years have been pretty rough on Iraqis. Roughly the same amount of Iraqis have died in the last 12 years or so since the Iraq War, or 13 years, than under the entire Saddam Hussein regime. So, doesn't seem like it's been the best thing. So what makes them different? What makes the Wolverines awesome and other rebel forces terrorists? Is it their nationality? Is it their religion? Is it their ethnicity? Is it the cause they fight for? Is it the type of violence they use? None of these. When I first started off on this, I had the intentions of also redefining the definition for terrorism. And these were all things I looked at, and they all just seem not good. Your nationality shouldn't really have anything to do with if you're considered a terrorist or not. Your religion doesn't really seem like it has anything to do with it. Your ethnicity... the cause, what your cause is could be viewed different from someone else. So that seems a little subjective to me. And the type of violence you use is just going to be whatever you can. Seems like if you have the methods of making a bomb, you're going to make a bomb. If you don't have the methods of making a bomb, you're not going to make a bomb. So all these didn't seem like they really worked for me. So I started trying to look at the government that they were fighting against and see if it was something to do with the government. So in Red Dawn, North Korea invades the United States. A dictatorship invades a democracy. In real life, the United States, democracy invades a dictatorship. I thought there might be something here in disputing the legitimacy of the government that they're fighting against. Then I thought about the Kingdom of Jordan. They're actually doing pretty well. They're considered they're considered a high human development country. So it doesn't seem like an attack on Jordan would necessarily be a good thing. They're actually an ally of the United States. They're one of the strongest allies of the United States in the Middle East. It's a kingdom. Seems like it'd be a dictatorship. Seems like the United States, if the United States is in favor of democracy, would want to overthrow the Kingdom of Jordan, but they don't. An attack on Jordan would be considered terrorism. So I abandoned the legitimate government stance. Didn't seem like there was actually going to be anything there for me. So then I started looking at the meaning of, like, the real meaning of the word and the etymology of the word. It first started in 1795. It was used during the Reign of Terror, coincidentally. Who would have thought? Terrorism, Reign of Terror. In France, it was used to describe the French terrorizing French civilians. So this is actually basically what we view as state terrorism. It made its way into English in 1798 during actually the Irish Rebellion, one of the Irish rebellions, and it was used in the sense of the English government terrorizing Irish civilians. They kind of had a policy of just to prevent the Irish Rebellion from going any further. They would just kind of kill people. At a certain point, it just meant time of destruction. Terrorism was dynamitism, or dynamitism? Yeah, dynamitism. There we go. In World War I, it was just used as frightfulness. I don't know what that German word is. Was used...
Dreadfulness.
Dreadfulness? Okay.
And I think it's dynamitism.
Dynamitism? I'll buy that. And that was just used as a deliberate policy of terrorizing enemy non-combatants. So this made me think of, like, Blitzkrieg, where the Germans weren't actually bombing military, they were just killing regular people. I looked at the Merriam Webster dictionary's definition. The simple definition was the use of violent acts to frighten the people, so it seemed seemed to capture the etymology of the word. The full definition is much similar. Terror, it gave a link to terror in that definition, and terror was defined as violence that is committed by a person, group, or government in order to frighten people and achieve a political goal. I found it interesting that the word is actually in the top 10% of words searched on the website. So people are pretty interested in it, and then I made the mistake of scrolling down to the comments, which I didn't know you could comment on a dictionary definition, and the first thing that it said was, the United States are terrorists. And then this is actually what started me on it, much like Francesco, Georg Meggle. He talks about two different definitions given. One was given by Fromkin in 1975. It was terrorism is violence used in order to create fear, but it is aimed at creating fear in order that the fear in turn will lead someone else to embark on some quite different program of action that will accomplish whatever it is the terrorists desire. He says that he's a fan of this one, but he liked the definition given by Igor Primoratz better. Terrorism is best defined as the deliberate use of violence or threat of its use against innocent people with the aim of intimidating some people into a course of action they otherwise would not take. What he liked about this definition was the use of innocent people against innocent people. And by innocent people, he takes the model of an innocent person as a child. But the use of it, he talks about he has a legitimate target of violence, which made me feel that was kind of weird. Legitimate target of violence. But this excludes, like Francesco said, it excludes members of armed forces and security services, suppliers of arms and ammunition, political officials directly involved in conflict. This would exclude assassination, so the anarchist who shot McKinley, in the train station here in Buffalo would not be considered a terrorist, even though the FBI definition directly mentions assassination as a form of terrorism. So it seems like it'd be a problem for the United States because they routinely use violence to try and get kind of what they want, whether it's political means or social means. So I thought of the recent bombing in Afghanistan, which I suppose was meant to kill some high-ranking officials of a terrorist organization, but actually killed 40 people in a hospital. I thought of torture techniques. So Abu Ghraib seems like they used torture in order to get some sort of information out of the people that the people would not generally give up. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because the Japanese government didn't look like they were going to be giving up anytime soon. So the United States dropped the 2 atomic bombs to coerce the government into quitting the war. And treatment of Native Americans and relocation. So I thought of the Trail of Tears, where the United States forced Americanized Cherokees out of Georgia to Oklahoma. A lot of them died. There was threat of violence. That's why they left. To coerce them to leave, they would not have left on their own fruition. And it seemed like the definition just includes most war acts. It's not pretty much any bombing campaign, any invasion, anything like that to try and get the government or people of the country to do something they wouldn't normally do. So I had all these in mind, and I also had the intuition to exclude state terrorism, but that seemed kind of weird because all the other commonly accepted definitions that I could find seem to include it. So we would exclude state terrorism just so that the United States are not considered a terrorist organization. But then that brought up the question, what even constitutes a state? So if you have a weak account of statehood, just the ability to tax and monopoly on violence, coincidentally, I had the same thought as Brian did in the back, that ISIS controls all the land in the gray. They have a monopoly on violence and the ability to tax. So if they just take money from people, it seems like that's kind of what the United States government does with taxing. In the side, you can see all the... I actually really like this map. You can see in green the Syrian opposition, in peach the Syrian government. I thought the amount of land that the Iraqi government actually controls right now, or not the Iraqi government. What is that? Is that supposed to be peach? The Syrian government is actually shockingly low. If you look, ISIS actually controls more of Syria than the Syrian government does. This is also an issue when you consider Boko Haram. They control a large portion of northeastern Nigeria, part of Chad. They also have the ability to tax. They have the monopoly on power. So this didn't really seem like it was going to fit. So then I took a strong stance on what could constitute a state. So recognition by the United Nations seemed like it could be something that would give me something to work with. And I ran into an issue with that too. Do you know 32 countries don't recognize Israel as a state? Everybody in purple have never recognized Israel as a state. The countries in light purple used to recognize Israel as a state and don't. And the countries in red have cut off ties with Israel. I thought it was really weird that Cuba is one of the countries that don't recognize Israel as a state. I could kind of understand the Muslim League not recognizing Israel as a state, but Cuba kind of struck me as strange. So I abandoned that too. It didn't seem like it was going to work. So I couldn't come up with a good definition of terrorism. It seemed like any definition I came up with, I was just going to have more and more issues with, and I'd end up having to give really finicky definitions of different things inside the definition of terrorism. So when Mandrick said that he prefers to just use alternative language, it kind of spoke to me. So, for instance, you can explain away like ISIS, or you can explain the Taliban, you can explain Boko Haram, you can explain the KKK as just religious extremists. You can use more definite language, it applies to them, you can figure out somebody's extreme in their views. I haven't come up with an account of when somebody is extreme in their views, but I don't imagine that it'd be all that difficult. Cartel members, so I also consider, that's why I knew about the Median cartel. It seemed like under that definition, then Pablo Escobar would be a terrorist. Just seems like it'd be better just say what they're in the cartel, or separatist if you're trying to gain freedom. So the IRA in Ireland would just be separatists. We can capture terrorist acts with alternative language that actually says what they do. A mass shooting, a suicide bombing, anything like hijacking. You can capture everything that you need to capture about terrorist acts without ever saying terrorist acts. As my final example, I looked at Osama Bin Laden before 1989. He was considered a freedom fighter. We gave him lots of money and lots of training in order to fight the USSR. After the USSR fell, he redirected his efforts back at the United States. All of a sudden, he becomes a terrorist. Nothing changed. His ideals stayed the same. His tactics stayed the same. The only thing that changed was who he was fighting. So he went from fighting the USSR to fighting the United States. The thing that was in common with that was that he was still an Islamic extremist. So it just seems like it'd be easier in ontology to just say he's an Islamic extremist rather than have to move him around depending on who he's fighting. So my conclusion, current definitions are too broad to be used in ontology. Attempts to revise the definition will be problematic, and alternative language can be used to make up the gap left behind by excluding the term terrorism. I really like this one quote from Meggle. Definitions of terrorism are not generally agreed upon, with even the possibility and utility of such definitions being denied. Instead, real or imagined TF cases are used to deliver the most efficient means for justification for nearly everything. For almost everything which, without their terrorism act or terrorism threats, could not have been justified at all, or at least not so easily. To name you a terrorist is not just to make you an outlaw, it is to excommunicate you from the human race. Thank you for listening. Questions? Yes.
I like your part of the North Korea because I'm coming from South Korea. So like that movie, I just trained for the fighting the North Korea in the military service for 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, so sometimes North Korea shoot the missile to the South Korea. So in general sense, we South Koreans mention that as the word, not terror. So the as far as my understanding of your definition, that would be the terror, not the word.
Yeah, so maybe North Korea shoots a couple missiles at South Korea just to create like panic and try and scare people. You can just capture that and it's an act of war, like you said, rather than trying to say that's terrorism. It seems like just attributing terrorism to things is pretty loose. I've noticed that. So I didn't address Francesco's saying that ISIS is a non-state actor if they act in a different country. It seems like they'd still be if the command came from ISIS. That they'd still be. So the CIA, I wouldn't say, is a terrorist group because seems like the CIA wouldn't be a terrorist group because they're working out of their jurisdiction. It seems like they would just still be the CIA. I mean, like you said, that's what they did. You can capture everything that the CIA does by just saying what the CIA does. You don't have to say that's terrorism or anything. Seems like under most definitions, the attack in Boulder, Colorado recently, where a guy who thought that Planned Parenthood was selling baby parts, so he shot up Planned Parenthood. nobody really called that terrorism. Seems like it'd be also be terrorism. So it seems like there's a certain cultural. Yeah.
Can you go back to 19?
19. Sure.
It seems that you, at the beginning, you talked about innocence, Meggle's innocence criterion. I think that that's a very important criterion, and I think it can help for many of the cases that you find problematic.
Okay.
So take here. So he was a freedom fighter before 1989 because he was working with innocent Afghanis whose country had been occupied by the Soviet Union to free Afghanistan. So he was a freedom fighter. The Russians in Afghanistan were not innocent. They were occupying the country. But then when Bin Laden organized 9/11, the targets were innocent. And he didn't have a dog in that fight, in the sense in which he and his colleagues had a dog in the fight against the Soviet Union. So I think that your own focus on innocence at the beginning deals with this case.
Okay.
I think there are other cases where it's a little bit more difficult. So I like the Irish rebellion case.
Okay.
Because I think that truly is problematic. Although if the Irish were rebelling, then that sounds as if they might not have been completely innocent. A more interesting one still is the Native American case.
Yeah.
So I like to compare that with the Irish case.
Okay.
But I don't have a clear understanding of the history of either of them in order to be able to.
Okay. Yeah. It's, I think you're probably I think you're right on the in a sense. It just seems like anything that anybody could have done in the USSR, though, no matter how bad it was, would have been considered terrorism, even if it like involved civilians, just because of the Cold War and how much the United States was just trained to not like.
So there
the
is a
USSR.
certain patina, as you point out in your final quote from Meggle, there is a certain patina of the word terrorism,
Right.
which makes people use it in order to gain rhetorical ends. And from that point of view, I agree with you that we're probably on the wrong road in ontology if we try and have a single unitary definition of terrorism. But the alternative involves a lot of careful thinking about these difficult cases so that we can build an ontology. And at some points in your presentation, you seem to be rather enjoying the fact that we couldn't get clear definitions. Where I think the attitude should be, it's really hard to get clear definitions.
I think we could still probably capture all the difficult cases that you're talking about without ever mentioning terrorism. So, could just so the Native American instance is just forced relocation. It's something that has happened. It seems like everywhere. The Turkish forced Armenian relocation in the desert. So we won't really consider that a terrorist act.
Good.
We consider that
But now-
genocide. So
Let's suppose we have good definitions of all of those cases.
right.
Then I still believe that we will be able to, if we imagine them laid out in a chart, I imagine that we will find some clear cases of what we might call prototypical thing which would be called a terrorist act. So Charlie Hebdo or Brussels or 9/11. And they would all group together. That's my anticipation.
Okay.
It needs to be done, of course, so that's what we should do now.
As long as I just don't use the word terrorism.
Well, no, you shouldn't use the word
Yeah.
terrorism to do the proper
Right.
tessellation. Then once you have the tessellation, you should explore what you should throw darts in the places which are prototypically called terrorism.
Okay.
The GIS people are good at those tessellations.
And
Yeah.
can you explain more about the difference between the freedom fighter and terrorist?
I honestly,
It seems like a subjective because
it's pretty subjective.
nothing
that's-
against Japan, but in the past, Korean was under the Japan. So someone just did the suicidal bombing. So we call it the freedom fighter, but I don't know the Chinese guy. How
I'm inclined to agree with Francesco that I don't think there is a clear difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter. It's pretty much whoever you're rooting for.
Yeah, right.
But there is here, for this case.
Right, there's a- I think
Because the USSR had invaded Afghanistan, they were
Right.
trying to get their freedom back. What they
So,
considered freedom.
but for that one, so Al Qaeda wasn't technically the government of Afghanistan.
No, he was helping out.
Right, so he was helping out, but when he started fighting after 2000 or 2001, when the United States invaded Afghanistan in the war on terror, if he's still helping Afghan people to try and drive out United. So would
we
you
need,
still
we
separate
need
the-
another dimension of directness. He was helping, and this may be the key to what you were getting at. He was helping the Afghanis in Afghanistan to free themselves from the Soviet yoke. That's freedom fighter.
Right.
In 9/11, he was helping generically radical Islamist freedom fighters, as they conceive themselves, who wanted to get American troops out of the Muslim lands. But he wasn't doing it by going to where the American troops were and actually shooting at the American troops in ways which could be reasonably described as an attempt to get them out of those Muslim lands. Rather, he was going to America to send a message through terror. And that's terrorism in one of these prototypical senses. Now, of course, what this means is that the Kobe bombing was not terrorism, because that was a direct assist to people who were trying to free their countries from American invasion. But then there is another component, which is that the Americans in, where was it, Saudi Arabia, where was the Kobe bombing? So no, this was, there was a bombing in Saudi Arabia of a ship. What was the name of the ship? About 8 years before 2000. Coal.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
confusing coal. The coal bombing, coal ship attack was not terrorism, because you were helping out people on their own soil. Then on the other hand, there is another difference, which is that the Russians, the Soviets in Afghanistan, were really acting to control the country. Where the Americans in Saudi Arabia, there were just a few of them in a camp helping out with oil or something. I don't know what they were doing. They weren't trying to take over the government of Saudi Arabia.
Well, it just seems like if that is the case where you're fighting for your freedom on your own soil type of thing,
Yeah.
then it seems like Iraqis have every right to fight for their freedom, or to have fought for their freedom when the Iraqi war is still really going on.
Yeah, but that's a really
not
complicated story, because there isn't one group of Iraqis.
That's true.
Some of the
Right.
Iraqis were really active in the Americans came.
Right.
Something else you may find relevant here is whether there's a state of war that exists between the entities, right? So some of the cases you gave about the U.S. really came about. So in the case of the Iraq war, it might not be a case, certainly a case where they're trying to get them out of the country. But if there is at least, maybe that's that case, but if there is a case where there is some sort of government struggling to go on and they're planning these covert attacks, it might not